The Associated Press is reporting that the International Atomic Energy Agency is saying that iodine-131 that shows up from nuclear meltdown and nuclear fission is increasing all across Europe. And it's because the Czech Republic is somewhat independent. They first reported it. This has actually been known for months, and there's been big meltdowns in France. Now, the reason I raise this is that all over the world, radiation levels are going up and up and up and up and up. They doubled during the atomic testing of the 50s and 60s. Then it more than doubled after Chernobyl because that was such an incredible meltdown. Now Fukushima, 5 of the 6 reactors, each one more devastating than Chernobyl, has melted down. And it's been raining radiation all over the northern hemisphere. And now they've had to admit that the radiation was, again, much higher than they'd said. Well, that came out on YouTube back when it was happening, when local Japanese were going with Geiger counters, showing it 10, 15, 20 times what the government was saying. People have died over their radiation exposure. That's now admitted, but now it's not the big national news story. So we have to ask ourselves, why is the United Nations agency downplaying this radiation danger? I want to go over some of the history of this. The International Atomic Energy Agency is openly funded, over 90% of its funding, by the big elements and the consortium that is itself funded by the big nuclear industry, by the biggest players in that. And I'm not against progress. I'm not against new technologies, but this is 40, 50-year-old stuff, and there's a long history of covering up disasters when they happen. And now basically just saying radiation isn't a problem. I've seen George Monbiot, the London Guardian, big environmentalist, eugenicist, population reductionist, promoter of world government, saying, oh, so what if radiation levels are going up? So what if cancer levels are going up? You know what? I love nuclear power. Well, I certainly don't love what's happening, and I don't appreciate my family being exposed to higher radiation. Chernobyl, 20-plus years after that disaster in 1986, has created a 12-fold increase in many forms of cancer, and over 1 million people, according to studies, have died as a result of that. The Australian newspapers reporting fears of radiation leak after explosion at nuclear plant in southern France. And again, this happened a few months ago, and that's probably what's causing what's happening in the rest of Europe, but they won't, again, nail it down because they're not wanting to go after culpability because the nuclear industry runs the IAEA. Continuing, don't forget, going back 4 or 5 months ago when radiation levels went up all across the U.S. because Japan's right here, here's the Pacific Ocean, here's North America, the trade winds, the jet stream blow towards the United States and over Europe. As the radiation levels went off the chart with different isotopes, the FDA just raised, depending on which isotope it was, 2,000 times, 5,000 times, 100,000 times, depending on the isotope, what they had said was previously safe. And again, all of these were isotopes directly linked to fission, to total meltdown, which the Japanese government denied, which our own government that had detectors over there denied, and later came out that they knew they were lying. The elites are breathing this stuff too. A crazy attitude has entered the equation where people in the establishment think that if they just rationalize things and just say, oh, you can eat poison, oh, you can jump off a cliff, oh, you can jump in front of a bus, that magically that somehow fixes it. That is not the case. So there's that report. And again, in Europe, for 6 months to a year, depending on the country, children only ate frozen food flown in, no milk, things that have the higher levels of radiation in it after fallout. Now, here in the U.S. and in Europe and Japan, they're saying eat everything, it's fine. Everything's wonderful. Now, continuing here, I want to look at some other examples of cover-ups. In 1959, there was a nuclear reactor that completely blew up and totally melted down in California. And it reportedly was even bigger than Chernobyl. They say it released 15 to 260 times the radiation of 3 Mile Island. And no one even knew about this to a few years ago when they declassified it. There's been meltdowns in Canada in the last 6 months. There's been meltdowns and huge releases in France. This stuff is happening all over the place. I mean, is this an accident? I don't know. Dr. Busby, who's a physicist and a chemical engineer, has said that many of his colleagues believe this is being done on purpose because nothing reduces fertility like radiation. And of course, in the sodium fluoride they mine out of phosphate fertilizer mines, there's also high levels of different radioactive isotopes that is also added to our water. And since I've been harping on this the last 2 years, now local news around the country is going and investigating and putting Geiger counters up to city water pipes and going, my God, this is 10, 20 times safe levels, and finding out. But they're saying, we don't know why it's in there. It's added, okay? It's added. It's all a plan. I know this isn't as important as the head football coach at Penn State being fired, but dying of radiation poisoning or having deformed children is almost as important as your precious pedophile-run college getting in trouble. Continuing here with this news and information, if we don't know about a meltdown in 59 in Simi Valley, what else is going on? Speaking of patriots, here on Veterans Day, Dr. Doug Rockey is a physicist, a doctor, a medical expert. He was the Pentagon's head expert for decades on DU. And he was the guy they sent to do an assessment after the first Gulf War of what was happening there. Most of his team has actually died. He himself has had more than, I think it's up to 40 surgeries now or more dealing with this. And you see, pre-1991, they would not allow the troops to use this. It was a desperate Cold War weapon if the Russians poured into Europe 10-to-1 superiority to take out tanks, when a nuclear war was already happening. Because when you fire it out of an Abrams tank, or you fire it out of your M16 or 50 cal or the Bradley Fighting Vehicles gun, it ignites and gives a lethal dose to those around it. One whiff of this, 20, 30 years, depending on the study, off your life. Continued exposure, you'll die within months. Okay? I mean, this is serious. Why have they waved a magic wand? They had this stuff in the 40s. There's reports on that. Back then they said don't use it in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Then they say use it. Now they're using it in small arms. Now it's at proving grounds, at National Guard bases. Now they say, hey, it's wonderful. What changed? They just waved a magic wand. In fact, we have some quotes of former Secretary of Defense bragging that'll come up in a moment, where the Secretary of Defense is just bragging, saying there's no problem with this, when their own manuals say it. Here's a quote, and it's not just children in Iraq, it's children born to soldiers after they come back. This is Doug Rockey. The military admitted they were finding uranium excreted in the semen of soldiers. If you've got uranium in the semen, the genetics are messed up. So when the children are conceived, and Life magazine admitted 10 years ago there was a tripling in birth defects in soldiers, the alpha particles cause such tremendous cell damage and genetics damage that everything goes bad. Studies have found that male soldiers who served in the Gulf War were almost twice as likely to have children, actually worse, it's triple, with birth defects, and female soldiers almost 3 times as likely. See, I hadn't read that quote. Dew got ready, and I was saying it's actually 3 times, and then he got to the bottom and I was correct. But it was the cover of Life magazine. I said 10 years ago. I think it was like 95. You might even search it. It's like Life magazine covers Gulf War vet deformities, and it'll show the father with his deformed child. The point here is this isn't a game. These people say, wave a magic wand, DU's okay. Wave a magic wand, all the honeybees are dying, but we've got GMO. Wave a magic wand. And I'm sorry to show you that, folks. That's real photos. They've got a 12 to 16 times increase in Serbia, where they bombed them, NATO did, in Fallujah. I mean, my God, and people are even getting tumors who are adults. I mean, they're having toxic Avenger type effects, not in utero, but after. And I'm sorry to have to show you this, but it goes to the madness of the people running things. I mean, it goes to just the complete insanity. And they know what they're doing. So here's another Dr. Doug Rockey. Everyone on my team was getting sick. My best friend John Sitton was dying. The military refused him medical care, and he died. John set up the medical evacuation commission system in the entire theater. Then he got contaminated doing the work. When we first got assigned to clean up the DU and arrived in northern Saudi Arabia, we started getting sick within 72 hours. Respiratory problems, rashes, bleeding, open sores, almost immediately. This is the guy that wrote the book on it. But meanwhile, we have quotes of Secretary of Defense saying, hey, there's no evidence this is bad, when the Army's own manuals pre-91 said do not use this. And there's William Cohen under Clinton saying, never mind all these dead and dying troops. There's no scientific link has been found between the reported illness and depleted uranium, a dense, mildly radioactive metal that the U.S. military uses both in tank-busting munitions and as armor. And, of course, that was 15, 16, 17 years ago. Now it's used in everything. Here's another report, Seattle Post-Intelligencer, Iraq cancer's birth defects blamed on U.S. depleted uranium. I mean, they all know exactly what's going on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the reality of the elite that's running things. Yeah, there's the manual. The U.S. Army acknowledges the hazards and training manual in which it requires that anyone who comes within 25 meters of any DU-contaminated equipment or terrain wear respiratory and skin protection, and states the contamination will make food and water unsafe for consumption. Yeah, for 4 billion years. Yeah, cancer rate has increased dramatically in southern Iraq. 34 people died of cancer in 1998. 450 died of cancer in 2001. There were 603 cancer deaths. That's a complete whitewash. That's why I stumbled over that. Okay. Look, that's enough. I know you've got a bunch of other graphics. I guess we could just keep showing them all the evidence. Again, the Army's own manuals from the 50s to 1990 said, do not use this, do not use this. When you fire it out the barrel, it ignites and leaves a whole bunch of it. Then they send it in for the crews to clean it and scrub it. They don't even tell them to wear protective gear now. And they're dying all over the place en masse. The deformed children, all of it. And it says celebrating 15 years of depleted uranium. It's actually, they've been using depleted uranium since 1991 in widespread operations all over the world.